Dilip Kumar, Part 6. I don't remember when exactly, but I was in my teens when I impulsively set out for Pune from Bombay after a mild disagreement with Agaji. We did not exchange harsh words or any such thing. He lost his temper over some trivial matter, and I still do not know what got into me at that moment. None of us dared to look into his eyes when he was angry, and on that fateful day, I decided to leave home quietly with more hurt and humiliation in my heart than anger or spite. The Second World War was raging, and the family was going through a crisis caused by diminishing income from the fruit business, which was becoming difficult to maintain as the supply from northwest frontier had dwindled due to strict wartime curbs on trade and transport of non-essential commodities. This was because the train bogies were being used for carrying ammunition and soldiers. All our orchards were in Peshawar, and we had no land here that we could call our own. I could sense the insecurity Agaji was feeling about the future. We were a large family comprising a large brood of daughters and sons. My sweet and kind hearted Amma was ailing already with symptoms of asthma, and my brother Ayub Sahab was being treated for the bone dislocation he had suffered when he fell off a horse while looking around for fresh supplies of apples in Kashmir and had been bedridden ever since. Also, two aunts from Agaji's side had become permanent fixtures in our home in Bombay as well. They continued to wallow in comfort here too, as they did in Peshawar, while Amma slogged in the kitchen. I wished to be of some help to Agaji by generating substantial income, but I had no idea how I could do so. My elder sister, Sakina Appa, was of marriageable age, and it was a constant worry to Amma that she lacked the feminine softness that made young women attractive to prospective parents looking for brides for their sons. Sakina Appa was literally the ruler of the house and had perhaps inherited the despotic ways of my dadi, that is, paternal grandmother. She argued endlessly with Amma over silly matters only to have her way and emerge triumphant. I could see that Akaji was carrying the burden of an uncertain future in his mind, and I should have not behaved the way I did on that morning. I left home with just 40 rupees in my pocket, boarding a train to Pune from Poribandar station. I found myself seated amidst all sorts of men and women in a crowded third class compartment. I had never before traveled third class, and I hoped no one known to Agaji had seen me at the railway terminal boarding that compartment, because he was always one to give his sons the best in everything, and all of us had first class passes for our local travel. I chose to travel by third class that morning because I had to conserve the limited money I had with me till I found myself gainful employment. When I alighted at Pune railway station, I was still hurting inside and was at a loss to figure out why Agaji had got angry with me the way he did. Had the hurt lessened during the journey, maybe I would have bought myself another ticket and returned to the comfort of my home and to my dear Amma, who I knew would go crazy with worry over my disappearance. As destiny would have it, I was determined to prove to Agaji that I could survive away from the security of our home and the easy life he had provided us with. Strangely, my elder brother Noor Sahab never felt the way I did. He took it for granted that Agaji would be there always to give him money. It did not bother him at all how hard it was for Agaji to make the kind of money that was needed to keep us all in comfort. He was of the opinion that the girls in the family did not have to go to school and college. He tried to convince me that I was wrong when I endorsed Agaji's decision to send our sisters to school and later college to study the subjects they were interested in. In retrospect, I think I was really adventurous to leave home and head for a city where I knew no one and had no idea of the employment opportunities there. In Pune, I went first to an Iranian cafe where I ordered tea and crisp salty biscuits. I was feeling happy that I had chosen a city far away from home where I would be anonymous and could seek any kind of employment. In Bombay, I could not have done that as people would have known me as Sarwar Khan Sahib's son, and it would have hurt Agaji's pride if I had taken up a job not befitting our social status. I spoke to the Iranian owner of the cafe in Persian, which made him very happy. I gingerly asked him if he knew anybody who wanted a shop assistant or something. He told me to go to a restaurant that was not far from his cafe and meet the owners, an Anglo Indian couple. It was a beautiful winter morning and the sun was shining through the clouds that seemed to move with haste as if they had to get somewhere urgently. I paused outside the Iranian cafe to take in the beauty of the day, warming up to the city's bustle, which was, of course, nothing compared to what we see now in the happening second metropolis of Maharashtra. It was my habit to walk briskly, so I reached the restaurant in no time. It was a quaint restaurant with its doors open for people who came there regularly, I guessed, for a good English breakfast. The tables were not too close to each other and were covered with clean cloth. There was only one waiter who bustled from one table to another, carrying omelets and slices of bread. Being an ardent omelette lover, even at the young age, the aroma was inviting, but I decided to pursue my objective first. I spotted the couple having an animated conversation at the cash counter. I walked up to them, but for a few minutes they did not notice me. They were talking about a regular customer who had not shown up for some days, and I could guess they were talking about a soldier of the British Army. When they noticed me, I quickly introduced myself without revealing much. I referred to the Iranian cafe owner who had directed me to them. The lady was plump and matronly. She smiled hesitatingly through the dimples in her freckled cheeks and nudged her tall, sturdy husband, saying, "The boy speaks good English. Send him to the canteen contractor." Mr. Wesley, as I understood his name was, looked at me carefully, paying scant attention to his wife's recommendation, and asked me if I hailed from the Northwest Frontier Province. When I murmured in the affirmative, he told me that he knew the army canteen contractor who was a native of Peshawar and had settled down in Pune and was a much respected person. This was something I was dreading. Anyone from Peshawar would know Agaji, and that would lead to trouble for me as the news would reach him about my job hunting in Pune. Brushing aside all the wild thoughts crowding my mind, I told Mr. Wesley I would be grateful if he could put in a word for me. He agreed, and the next thing on my agenda was to find a place to stay, a room, maybe in a hotel that could give me decent comforts like a clean bed and a bathroom with hot water. I asked Mr. Wesley if he could suggest such a hotel. He sent me to one that had the amenities I had mentioned. Alone in my room that night, I felt the first pang of separation from my parents, especially from Amma. I could imagine her simmering grief and her helplessness. I knew she felt Agaji should not have got so furious with me, but it was not in her nature to question him or oppose him. I never ever saw them exchanging endearments or sitting close to each other. Theirs was a relationship that had layers of implicit understanding, trust, respect, and love. Much of what they wished to tell each other about immediate concerns, be it about the financial needs for running the kitchen of a home which had its doors open all day for visitors who enjoyed Agaji's company and his hospitality, or the social interactions of Nur Sahib, remained unspoken. I could not sleep for a long time because I was feeling sorry for Amma and missing the soft lullaby she sang for me when I could not fall asleep easily. However, my determination to stand on my feet and earn a good income was foremost in my mind, and that sense of purpose helped to dispel all my sadness. Before long, I fell asleep. The next morning, I walked to the office of the canteen contractor with a prayer that he should not recognize me. Lo and behold, I found myself standing in front of the younger brother of Agaji's friend from Peshawar. He was polite and he asked me to be seated. The gentleman in front of me was Taj Muhammad Khan and his elder brother was Fateh Muhammad Khan OBE, that is, Order of the British Empire. There was no sign of recognition when I introduced myself rather vaguely as a job seeker from Bombay. I was fully aware of his background since Akaji had often mentioned his name in conversation with friends who came from Pune to visit him. Taj Muhammad Khan had the usual awe inspiring bearing of a Pathan and he did not ask me any questions. He gave me a sheet of paper and a pen and dictated a letter to the canteen manager requesting him to employ me as his assistant. I took the dictation obediently and corrected the English, which betrayed his not having much familiarity with the language. He was impressed, but he did not want to show it to a rank outsider, I surmised. The manager was indeed in search of an assistant who could take charge of some of the more irksome burdens he was shouldering in the daily management of the canteen. He was extremely happy that I could converse fluently in English. He showed me my room and confirmed my appointment by shaking my hand vigorously. There was no talk of wages, but I presumed it would be decent and sufficient to sustain myself. My immediate need of getting employment was fulfilled, and it gave me a great sense of achievement. Here I was in a city where I was a stranger and I had not only found a job but decent accommodation as well. The alienation I felt the previous day was lessening already. There was much to look forward to, and I thought I could prove to Agaji that I was not as worthless as he had made me feel with his ranting on the day he lost his temper. My job entailed several responsibilities bundled together under the head General Management. I had to check the stock of fruits, grocery, vegetables, eggs, milk, cheese, and butter every day and get fresh stock from the market, taking care not to buy old stock that shopkeepers tried to palm off as new. I had to ensure that the kitchen and its environment were clean and hygienic. The pool side and the cleanliness of the water in the pool also had to be attended to. Finally, I had to maintain registers and account books for cash inflows and outflows. By the time the canteen manager showed me around and listed my responsibilities, I had half a mind to ask him what was left for him to do as a manager if I was being entrusted with all the tasks he had enumerated. Better wisdom prevailed, and I followed him meekly while he talked in a jumble of English and Urdu, which was exasperating for me as a listener. I started off with great confidence since I could judge the quality of the fruits, vegetables, cheese, butter, eggs, and so on with ease. There was something fishy going on between the vendors and the manager, about which I came to know by and by when I rejected some of the stuff that was of lesser quality but was being purchased at a higher price. I brought the matter to the manager's attention dutifully. He advised me to overlook it, and without stopping to explain why, he went about doing whatever he was pretending to do. It did not take long for me to realize that I should keep my distance from whatever the manager was doing, legitimately or illegitimately. I think he appreciated my feigned ignorance of his doings, and in return, he was extremely nice to me. He did not mind the attention I got from the colonels, brigadiers, majors, and captains who frequented the club and ordered snacks during the day and reappeared in the evenings. A part of the club was open only to the officers, and another part in the rear was open to the Tommies, that is, British soldiers who were not officers. They were all very fond of me and called me Chico. I learned that Chico in Spanish meant a youngster or a lad. There were officers who called me by my name, Yusuf Khan, pronounced with a strong British accent. They were at first very curious to know how I could speak English the way the language should be spoken. They liked the way I dressed immaculately in clean, ironed trousers and full sleeved shirts. From time to time, I can remember I had a fetish for wearing well stitched trousers and full sleeved shirts of good quality material. The friendliness of the officers gave me solace and a wonderful feeling of belonging. There was a lot of camaraderie in the rank and file of the British, while the officers were reserved and extremely gentlemanly. An idea occurred to me one day when the regular chef was absent and the manager asked me if I could come up with something as a major general was having a few important guests for tea. I told him I could make sandwiches with reasonable success. He asked me to go ahead but warned me to be careful to use fresh bread and butter and other ingredients. I assured him that I would make sure everything was fresh, even as I wondered how I could ensure that with all the conniving going on between him and the vendors. Fortunately, the sandwiches were a hit. The guests of the Major General praised the manager, who received the compliments smiling broadly. That was when the idea occurred to me to request him to get sanction from the contractor and the club's office bearers to let me set up a sandwich counter at the club in the evenings. Since he was very pleased with me and he knew I had knowledge of what was going on between him and several suppliers, he sent my request to the concerned authorities with his recommendation, and permission was granted. My sandwich business opened very successfully. All the sandwiches were sold out in no time, and the latecomers were disappointed when they found out that the sandwiches were very tasty and they had missed the chance to enjoy them. On the second day, I brought out a large table and covered it with white starched cloth and laid out fresh fruits that I had selected carefully from the market, along with sandwiches and chilled lemonade. The second day was a bigger success, and in less than a week's time, I was counting the rewards with a sense of joy that comes when one's hard work yields unexpected results. When I began making money from the sandwich business, I found the courage to send a telegram to my brother Ayush Sahab informing him that I was in Pune and he may please tell Amma that I am well and working in the British Army canteen. My telegram must have given Amma much relief. The following week, Ayush Sahab arrived without prior intimation and he brought dry fruits and suji halwa prepared by Amma for me. He had also brought some money which Amma had saved from her household allowances. I was so happy to see Ayush Sahab, who could not hide the tears glistening in his eyes when he and the attendant who came with him met me at the reception counter of the club. I told Ayub Sahab that I was comfortable and doing well and I did not need the money Amma had sent through him. He could see for himself how everybody knew me and I was well fed, hale and hearty. If there was anything I did not have, it was the warmth of my family. I was always very comfortable talking to Ayush Mia. He and I shared a brotherly bond that was strong and deep. I poured out my heart to him, talking to him while sitting on the bench in a park nearby as the sun went down inch by inch on the horizon in a blaze of orange and gold, while the birds flew hurriedly into the branches of trees, creating a cacophony of twitters and screeches, perhaps signaling to one another that one more day was done. I recounted to Ayub Sahab how I had set out impulsively and how I felt remorseful about not confiding in him or Amma. I told him how much I wanted to be of support to Agaji given the difficult situation he was in. Ayub Sahab understood and sensitive as he was, he just listened and spoke little. He returned to Bombay the next morning and I went back to work after seeing him off at the railway station, somewhat less burdened and more relaxed. At the club, a surprise was awaiting me. Corporal Marlowe, who was known to me at Devlali, had arrived on duty in Pune. As I set eyes on him in the club, standing at the reception desk, looking as severe as he always did, a torrent of gruesome memories flashed before my mind. At Devlali, he was known as the Dog Man. My school friends and I took to our heels when we ran into him because we imagined he was some kind of an ogre and not a human being. His stocky figure, even in the distance as we returned from school in the afternoons, frightened us. The reason was that He had the regular habit of aiming his revolver at any stray dog he saw and shooting the poor unprepared animal dead in one shot. After the dog stopped breathing, he would take a knife out of a bag he kept in the rear of his jeep and tiptoe up to the dead animal, cut its tail, and put it into the bag. I was too young to be convinced about his action when Chacha Umar explained to me that he was doing so because stray dogs were not allowed to wander in the cantonment premises and in the vicinity, and that he was cutting the tails to keep a count of the dogs he had shot and to count for the bullets he had used. It was an eerie memory that I had successfully erased from my mind as I grew up and we moved back to Bombay. When the manager called out to me to introduce the corporal, I felt the same tingle in my spine that I used to whenever I bolted to hide and watch him drive past in his jeep in Deolali's rugged roads. He greeted me without a smile and walked away. Initially, the corporal had no intention of being friendly. However, he began to show signs of thawing as the days passed, and before long, we were on very friendly terms as he realized that all the officers liked me and treated me well. His obsession with the killing of stray dogs continued in Pune too, but it was not as regular as it was in Deolali since stray dogs could rarely be sighted near the cantonment. My room within the canteen premises was nice and comfortable, though small. It had a glass window which provided a clear view of the hall where the officers gathered in the evenings when there was a party hosted by one of the seniors. There would be music, and I could see the officers and their wives dancing to it. The officers would be wearing elegant suits with smart Indian silk ties that were bought at exclusive shops. I wondered if I would ever possess one such suit. Little did I know then that one day I would possess the finest suits a man of good taste could buy and own. I sometimes reflect when I see the array of garments in my wardrobe. Perhaps my preference for suits as formal wear has something to do with the longing I had during the army club days. As mentioned earlier, it was wartime and there used to be discussions among the senior officers about India's neutral stand in the war. One evening, an officer asked me to give my opinion on this topic and as to why we were fighting for independence from British rule so relentlessly while we chose to stay unaligned in the war. I gave him what I thought was a good reply, and he asked me if I would make a speech before the club members the next evening when the attendance would be full. I agreed and spent the night preparing my speech. I had studied the British Constitution as a student at Anjuman Islam School and put that knowledge to good use in preparing a speech that outlined our superiority as a nation of hard-working, truthful, and non-violent people. While making my speech in the club, I emphasized that our struggle for freedom was a legitimate one and It was they, that is, the British administrators, who were consciously misrepresenting the civil laws of their constitution and creating the consequences. My speech evoked genuine applause and I felt elated, but the enjoyment of my success was short lived. To my surprise, a bunch of police officers arrived on the scene and handcuffed me, saying I had to be arrested for the anti British views. I was taken away to the Yarwada jail and locked up in a cell with some very decent looking men who I was told were satyagrahis, that is, followers of Mahatma Gandhi who offered passive resistance. On my arrival, the jailer referred to me as a Gandhiwala. I could not figure out why he was using this term for me till I heard the policemen refer to all the inmates of the cell as Gandhiwalas. It was their way of herding us together as followers of Gandhi. I exchanged pleasantries with my fellow inmates and they told me that Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was in one of the cells and they were all on a hunger strike along with him. I don't know why, but I too felt I should fast with them. So I refused the food that was brought for me in an unclean plate. The night was long and pangs of hunger kept me awake till dawn. In the morning, I heard the sound of boots approaching my cell, and soon the jailer was standing before me, accompanied by an army major. Here is your Gandhiwala, he said sarcastically. The major had come to release me and take me back. He was a good chap with whom I had played badminton when I could find time for the sport on an occasional Sunday. As soon as reached the club, I asked for food and it amused everybody around me when I told them I had fasted all night. It might have sounded funny to them, but for me, it meant being a Gandhiwala at least for one night. As I sat alone in my room that night, I kept hearing the jailer's words in my subconscious and a sense of pride built up within me that I had spent a night in jail with Gandhi's followers and even if it was for a few fleeting moments, I was unafraid of expressing my pride about my country and my compatriots.